Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Kylie Thomas, and I am the Managing Director of DreamstoneHR. Thank you for joining us today. It is a pleasure to have you all with us. So, probation is one of those areas many leaders will assume is really simple. We'll hire them, we'll see how they go, and if it doesn't work out, that's okay, we can just deal with it later. But in reality, probation is one of the most influential stages of the employee's journey. So it really shapes their performance, their confidence, and whether they see a future within your organisation. So today's session, we're going to explore how probation becomes more of a strategic tool when it's done well, but also flagging some of the risks and the traps that we see if it isn't managed well and how you can avoid those. So ideally, by the end of the session, you'll have some practical steps and tools to help with new employee success while confidently managing the performance if it's not quite there when we do have those particular situations. So let's jump in. So think of probation as a mutual assessment period. So yes, we're assessing the employee to make sure they're right for our business. Equally, they're assessing us to make sure that they enjoy the working environment, and gone are the days where it is completely an employer market, and employees are assessing us just as much as we are them. So this is a really, really critical stage. Statistically, this also really matters as well. So around 1 in 8 new hires in Australia will leave during probation. So whether or not that's because the employer has exited them or whether or not they voluntarily leave. So obviously, as we all know, the cost of recruitment is quite significant, but you've also got the lost time in onboarding as well as the impact on culture. So it's really important that we try to get it right. So where does probation go wrong most often? So where we're seeing this happen is where expectations aren't clear, where there wasn't support that was structured. Feedbacks potentially come a bit late in the process, and issues were allowed to sort of settle in and become almost expected in some instances instead of addressing them early. So if I bring this to life for you in a bit of a hypothetical scenario, so you hire a new team leader. They're enthusiastic but a little bit unsure. The team is busy, onboarding gets a bit rushed, and your new team leader is left to figure it out. Now, if I'm honest, we've all had that situation where we've either been in a role where we're just, sink or swim. However, by week 6 in this scenario, mistakes are starting to creep in. The confidence is fading. And then by week 10, they feel like they're failing and we feel like they're failing. Neither side has had a conversation about those expectations. So this isn't necessarily a performance problem. This could simply be a lack of systems from a leadership perspective. Probation shouldn't be quiet, as they say. It should be a really supported and guided process through employment. It doesn't need to be overly complex, and we'll go through some strategies for you now. But it's really important that we use the probation process to do a couple of things. One, let's enable success, but also accelerate the clarity. And that's a really important element too. So handled well, probation is going to really strengthen trust. I know what's expected, and I know where to go for help. If probation and those first kind of onboarding elements aren't going to result in the feeling of, I'm not sure how I'm going, I'm not even sure if I want to be here. So that disengagement creeps in really, really early. And of course, when disengaged employees are around, they're obviously not performing at their peak. So again, we're actually perpetuating an issue which we could have resolved in the beginning. I'm just going to take a minute to have a chat now. I'm not going to bore you with contract law and reference different legislations, but it's really important to highlight one of the biggest misconceptions around probation. So they're actually probation and then the legal risk that comes with probation are two independent concepts. What this means is you've actually got probation within your employment contract. So this is written into the agreement. It often sits around 3 to 6 months in reality. And this will govern what happens in that sort of period, whether or not you've opted for a 3 or a 6 month period. Your contract will typically say in that period you are only needed to be provided 1 week notice. It can be paid in lieu, so on and so forth. Now, the Fair Work legislation doesn't actually have a probation legislation. What it's called is the qualifying period. And this is what determines when an employee gains access to unfair dismissal protections. And for most employers, this is going to be 6 months. But for small businesses, this is going to be 12 months. So these concepts do overlap, but they don't replace each other. So what this means is, even during probation, employees can claim some things, like, for example, what's called adverse action. They can claim discrimination or bullying or harassment. They can also claim work health and safety breaches or breaches to general protection provisions. And we'll use a scenario for that in a second. So it's just really important that these things do stand independently. So it's really important to make sure that we call that out. So a hypothetical example here is that a new employee that has been hired requests to take personal leave for illness while they're in their probation. The team leader gets really frustrated because they're still learning. Coverage is difficult. We've all been there. The leader, however, decides to terminate the employment and says, this isn't working. You've had too much time off already. This termination could be legally challenged on the basis of illness. So one of the protected attributes under unlawful dismissal is around illness, sick leave, disability, those kinds of elements. So there is still risk here in this situation. So how do you protect your business best? It's to make sure that we're actually setting those expectations and we're having those regular conversations. In terms of this contractual piece, it's really the main thing I want to sort of take away is that first 6 months doesn't mean you have unlimited legal protections. There are still things that employees will have access to and that you need to make sure that you comply with. We're going to talk about some of the things that you can do to reduce your risk, but it's really important to make sure that you're setting those expectations up front. Here we go. So probation is really simple, but it's great to have a structure. So we'll provide you with, after this session, a one-pager, which can just cover off some of these elements for you. And it's a really good point to refer back to when you've got a new employee, just so that you can actually have a nice little structure to this. I'm going to break it down for you. So what we really suggest around best practice is setting those expectations early. Don't wait until the role is officially learned to then tell the person what's expected of them. Tell them what success looks like next week, next month, this quarter, right now. And this can be really, really simple. So you could, for example, say something like, in your first month, we're focused on building strong foundations, getting up to speed on the systems, building the relationships, understanding our customers, those kinds of things. By month 2, we'll expect more independence. We'll expect you to be prioritizing your skills. If you can, it'd be really great in this particular conversation, which I would suggest in their first week, to also talk about any metrics that you have. So, for example, we want you to sell 20 widgets a week or whatever those particular elements might be. If you don't have those, that's okay. I do strongly suggest that you give that some thought though. If you don't have them, it's okay. What you can do here though, as I said, is focus on what you're going to be doing in terms of expectations, the systems, relationships, building those foundations. Definitely talk about behaviours as well, because obviously when we're looking at whether or not somebody is right for our business, we're not just looking around whether or not they are performing right, it's also whether or not they're a good fit. So making sure we're sharing those expectations. This gives direction and really starts to remove that unnecessary anxiety that people get, especially when they're new in a role. Another really good element is to structure some scheduled check-ins. But this doesn't need to be overly complicated. It doesn't need to be overly formal or take up too much time. But these conversations aren't just about reviewing tasks or the workload, also looking at performance, behaviours, the confidence that they're exerting within the role, the relationships they're building, the stresses that they're seeing. What's also really great is to talk about what support they need. And the reason for this is twofold. One is because obviously you want to support them in their new role, but also because if you do have to get to a point where you terminate their employment, it's really important for you to be able to retrospectively say, we talked about the support you needed, we provided you that support, and you still weren't able to achieve what we needed. So it starts to add some of those protections for you, but upfront. So we're setting that expectation, we're talking about it in those structured discussions. These don't need to be weekly, these need to just be regular and consistent. Calendar invite on day one, so setting those calendar invites up front, it really does set the tone with that new starter. You matter, this matters, it's important, it's on my mind, I'm keeping it at the top of the priority list. Another thing that we really suggest is make sure that you're giving feedback early and doing it often. If something doesn't feel right, say it respectfully and with support, but make sure you're calling it out early. So if we think about a particular scenario, you've noticed that a new staff member is avoiding client calls. You could say something along the lines of, I've noticed you seem a little hesitant in making those outbound calls. Can you tell me what's feeling challenging there for you and what support we could do to help you? This, I know, can sometimes feel like it's overkill. They should know it. But what this does is it allows them to have really clear clarity. It's also good for you to see what some of the challenges are up front. We don't want to have to keep turning over staff, especially in that 6 months. So this is where we can capture some of those early issues that we can try to put to bed. Now, documentation or keeping brief notes. This is really, really critical. If you do any webinars with me, you'll know that I always talk about the importance of documentation. This doesn't need to be overly complex. Simple, to the point, factual. This doesn't need to be in an app. You don't need to have technology for it. It can be simply in a Word book, or you can pop it in your calendar. What works for you, but it doesn't need to be overly formal. What it does need to do, though, is you need to have the date. I've had a conversation with so-and-so on such and such. What was discussed? Talked about performance, talked about the need to pick up the phone and speak to more customers. What support was agreed? I said I would check in every fortnight to see how that call with that difficult customer so-and-so is going. Person A is actually going to make a conscious effort to do X, Y, and Z by the end of the week. Now, that would be perfect. At the end of the day, as long as you've got some factual information recorded, is really, really important. From a fair work perspective, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting we go through formal performance management for people that is in probation. What this is, though, is about tracking really, really good notes. So what Fair Work are going to do if you do need to terminate in probation is they are going to say, if it's challenged, they are going to ask, did that person know there was a problem with their performance before you pulled the trigger on their termination? So that's what this is. This is recording that for you so you have that defensibility should you need to. Lastly, it's really important about closing the loop. So don't let probation end in silence. This is what I'm saying about don't get to that end point and not have had a conversation. A successful completion also deserves to have some celebration. So if on the flip side, we're keeping the person, we think they're amazing, let's celebrate that. Let's pop a letter out to them that says you've successfully completed your probation. We really look forward to continuing to work with you. Just a quick note on that, though. If you don't provide that letter, it doesn't mean that probation isn't completed. The minute they get to that 6-month mark, it's all over. They have passed, whether you put it in writing for them or not. So what this actually does, though, is provide some engagement with the person. You've remembered it 6 months. You've called it out. You've congratulated them. It's just a really good way to keep that person engaged and motivated as you're moving along. Let's talk about extensions, because this is probably where a lot of businesses unintentionally increase their risk. Probation period is only lawful, an extension in probation is only lawful in a few circumstances. I'm going to run those through. Please reach out if you've got any questions on this because it can be a little bit confusing. Employment contracts can say that extensions can be made or the employee can agree. However, it still needs to fit within that Fair Work qualifying period that we talked about. So, for example, for most businesses, that's 6 months. For small businesses, that's 3 months. So if either of these conditions fail, an extension is not an option. So what I'm talking about here is, let's say, for example, your contract has 3 months probation in it. You've got more than 15 employees, so you're not a small business. And you say to that person that this isn't working, we've got some concerns, and I've got a script that I'll share with you in a second, but you're talking to them about the fact that you're going to extend it, but you can only extend it to that maximum of that 6 months. That can't go past that qualifying period within Fair Work. So this is really an opportunity for you to have that conversation with them, talk to them about what's happening, and really make sure that you're using this as an opportunity to improve that performance, set those expectations, and make sure that you are really driving that change. There is an exception to this, though. So in terms of extensions, there is one exception, and this is about an example where employees have taken significant leave within their probation period. So, for example, a long-term illness. So let's say, for example, you've got a probation period of 6 months, but during that 6 months, an employee has actually taken, in total, it doesn't have to be consecutive, but in total, they've taken 6 or 8 weeks off leave, obviously mainly unpaid, for an illness or something. It might be an illness of a child or something like that. You can have a conversation with them and extend their probation for the exact amount of time that they've taken as leave. No more than that. Can be less, but no more than that. You also need to make sure that you're setting the expectation as a way of being supportive. So a scripting that you may want to use with regards to this, something along the lines, now, of course, use your language and use your words, but things like, for example, we can see your potential. We want to give you the opportunity to succeed. To achieve this, we're really going to need to extend that probation by X number of weeks so that we can continue to focus on supporting your development in whatever those areas are. We're going to meet regularly to discuss that progress. We're clear. The timelines are there, there's support, and we're talking about the intent. So with an extension, it's really important to make sure that it's well communicated and that it is not something that's come out of the blue for the individual. That's really important. This is a quick case for you just to kind of see why the communication matters so much when we're extending probation. So this is a case where we've had a speech pathologist who's raised concerns in a remote work setting. She's later taken sick leave during this time. Then her probation was extended, which was allowed under her contract. So the employer thought this was a reasonable step that they needed to take in order to make sure that they had the appropriate time to assess her performance. The employee, however, felt like this was a rejection. She felt like this was them pushing her out. She's made a claim to the Fair Work Commission. Now, the Commission has actually found that no dismissal or anything unlawful took place. They did find that the extension was lawful and reasonable because they did have that communicated within the contract. What it did call out, though, is that there was a perception of a damaged relationship. So they could have worded this better to have avoided that particular resignation and then obviously the issues that come later. So they could have said something along the lines of, your contribution is valued. We want to ensure we fully understand your capabilities and the support needs, including around travel and safety. We'll extend the probation for a period of 8 weeks so that we can work on this together. So again, clear, supportive and aligned to the wellbeing. On the flip side, here's an example of a case where communication and the reasoning was a little bit lacking. So a supervisor raised concerns about a workplace issue. Shortly after this, she was dismissed during probation, but without any clear explanation as to why. The court found that there was a likely connection between the workplace issues that she raised, the timing of her termination that was not explained properly. What we learned from this case is that if a dismissal decision can't be explained really clearly and objectively, we probably shouldn't be making it yet. The script you can use here sounds a little bit like the concerns relate to communication and accuracy in stock reporting or whatever the issue you might be having. We've discussed these 3 or 4 times now. We haven't seen the improvement that we've expected. Based on this, we've made the difficult decision to not continue your employment past probation. There, it's factual and you've got the documentation. Keep in mind that probation isn't a shield. There are still legal remedies that an employee can actually activate. Now, probation isn't about catching people out. It's about bringing out their strengths. Leaders should really intentionally recognise improvement, celebrate the quick wins, and reinforce effort and that cultural alignment. Share the positive feedback openly. It's really important that employees know that they're doing well. Deserve to know that they're succeeding, but also know where they need to do better. So a successful completion of probation should feel like somebody, I belong here. I'm believed in. Let's move forward as a team. And that's how we can really start that engagement and cultural journey with our new starters. Think of this as an investment in that culture piece, in that future performance. If we can get this right, we're really setting our people up for success. But here's what we see quite often in terms of pitfalls and things that we need to avoid in probation periods. So passive onboarding, that sink or swim, really doesn't work when we need to engage our people and make sure that we're on the right path. Silence until the end, This is really, really dangerous for an organisation. So please make sure that you're not waiting right until that last minute before you're having a conversation about performance. Not having any documentation. This is really, really critical. As I mentioned, it is such an important element to make sure clear and factual information is documented. Inconsistent support is something too. By saying, yes, I can support you with that, and then not, that's a really tricky one for employers because that can really open you up for some further challenges down the track. We also want to avoid that fear of that honest conversation. We all know that difficult conversations are really difficult, but let's not avoid them. It's really, really important to make sure that we're having those conversations when we need to. And also, a common pitfall is actually forgetting to formally confirm completion. As I said, it's a really great tool to use as engagement, and people want to know that you remember that they're at that 6-month mark. So if we act early, probation then becomes really, really easy. If we avoid it, probation becomes really messy, and that's the part that we're trying to avoid. So what does this look like in really simple steps that you can take today? Make sure that you're booking in probation milestones before day one. So use the checklist that we're going to send you through. Make sure that you're prepared for your new starter. Start feedback early, not only when things go wrong. Make sure that you've got that really good cycle structure in place. Ask supportive and coaching questions like what's going well, what obstacles are you facing, document, document, document. Even if it is informal, even if it is just a note in your calendar to say, this is what I spoke to so-and-so about today. Just to have something down in writing that you've got there. And then partner with HR early if you've got concerns that arise. This doesn't need to be a costly exercise. Pick up the phone, give us a call, have a quick chat about, hey, this is the scenario. What should I be doing in this particular situation? Every new hire deserves a plan. They deserve to be able to partner with their leader and a pathway to success. This is going to provide you a really strong basis for making the most of your new employee. Well, no, recruitment takes forever, so we certainly don't want to have to be going through that all the time. Excuse me. To wrap this up, here is a clear 5-step action plan that I strongly, strongly encourage you all to take away today. Review your contracts. Make sure that you have a clearly defined probation clause within your contract. Align your probation steps internally with what Fair Work expect. Build a structured check-in rhythm. So what does that look like? I'm not suggesting you have to meet every week with your employees. As an absolute minimum, you should have a formal conversation, set those expectations when they start, 3-month mark, and at the 5-month mark. 5 months, not 6 months, because we're not waiting until the end, remember? That is as a bare minimum. Ideally, you would want to be meeting with them monthly. Equip your leaders or yourselves with some simple scripts. So prepare. There's nothing wrong with going into a conversation and saying to that person, I'm just going to read from my script to make sure that I share with you all of the information. The leader, you don't have to have all the answers on the spot at the minute. It's okay to have a script or some talking points and make sure that you land that meeting as you need to. They will appreciate it when they walk out and they've got all the information really clearly articulated. Also, it's really important to make sure that you're sharing the success at the probation completion. It's a really, as I said, really, really good opportunity to start to engage that in success. Probation is not a waiting period. Okay, this is a really good opportunity to start that active leadership. Let's not have them sink or swim. Let's set some really, really structured programs for them to make sure that they're going to be set up for success. And this is something you can do once in terms of a checklist, and you use it for every employee. So it doesn't need to be overly cumbersome in terms of your time, but it is a really valuable investment. So handled well, probation really builds loyalty. You're understanding the capability and you're building confidence from the very, very start. And this is really important. And this is where the research tells us we get the most out of our people. When we're investing in these kinds of activities, this is where we're really getting that loyalty. It was a really quick 30 minutes. Thank you so much for your time today. If you'd like any support with regards to reviewing your probation process, you are more than welcome to reach out to us. For those of you who have joined today, we will be popping you out a one-pager. There was a lot of information we went through today. So the purpose is for you to be able to use that as a quick reference guide for your new starter so that you can really set them up for success. We do have a couple of questions. We do have a couple of minutes. So if anybody does have any questions, they are welcome to pop them into the Q&A. I'm happy to hang around for the next 5 minutes to answer any of those. But thank you again for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. Keep in touch. We've got a lot of these coming up in the future, so I look forward to hopefully seeing you all then.